theyeshiva.net.
Today's class is dedicated by Shmuel Mandel in honor of his Eshes Chayil, Miriam, and their 22nd wedding anniversary. Mazel Tov, for many, many, many long, happy, healthy, prosperous years, filled with nachas, joy, serenity, tranquility, harchava, bracha, and hatzlacha ad b'lidai b'tach Klal Yisrael. And thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your friendship. Happy anniversary. Shmuel and his family were also the ones who sponsored the creation of the original app for theyeshiva.net. So thank you very much for that. And now we're updating it into a new version, Be'ezer Hashem, speedily. Thank you and Mazel Tov. So you know those scenes where you have this really, really sophisticated presentation, whether it's a production, a play, or a concert. Thousands of people are mesmerized by the artists, by the performers, by the musicians, by the singers. The stage is set impeccably to perfection. There's the right sound effects, lights and shadows, a real top-notch production. And suddenly, a child who's lost just walks onto stage. And what happens? Everybody's focus shifts onto this child. You can have there, Mordechai ben David, Avrem Elefried, Shweki, whoever your favorite performer is. It doesn't matter. You can have the greatest cantors, chazonim, singers. That little child who's looking for his mommy and sheepishly just walks across stage managed to attract the attention of all 10 or 20,000 people in the room. You feel bad almost, right? You feel almost bad for the singer. He's he's trying so hard, but everybody's attention goes to the child. Why? And by the way, it's always like that, right? I can be giving a shiur. I think it's a pretty good shiur. Everybody's listening, yeah? Then somebody comes in like late, sits in the front, or somebody comes in with food, and everybody loses their attention and is attracted to that person. I've been trying to understand for years. Why is it? Why is that? Perhaps one answer is it's the only part of the show that's not choreographed. It's the only part that's authentic, real, raw. So it was not part of the plan. There were no preparations for this. Somehow there's a real story here that emerges that doesn't exist in the other story as authentic and as wonderful and as inspiring as it is. Well, I'm giving you this metaphor because I think it's really maybe inaccurate, perfect, maybe not a perfect metaphor, but I think it really captures what happens at one verse in Parshas Vayishlach. There's a whole story. The narrative is flowing. Some parts of it are exhilarating and inspiring. Some parts of it are sad and tragic and always nuanced and complex and difficult. But there's a flow. You can see there's a flow from the beginning all the way till the end, as there is in every single parsha of Torah. And then suddenly this whole divine flow is interrupted by a story without any sequence, any context, any background, no backdrop, no strings attached. Nobody knows who, why, what, when, where, why now. And really, it captures your attention and it forces the reader, the student, to pay attention and try to understand what is happening here, precisely because it doesn't seem to belong here. So if you open up your source sheets, you'll see what I'm referring to. It's Genesis chapter 35, verses 6, 7, and 8. Vayishlach, Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Vav, Zayin, and Ches. Let's remember the context of the story. Yaakov Avinu fled from his brother's wrath. 20 years earlier, his mother told him it's time to leave. He departs from the land of Canaan. He relocates to a place called Haran. Today they call it Haran, H-R-R-A-N, in Mesopotamia, northern Iraq, southern Turkey. He lives there he marries Leah, he marries Rachel, Bilhah, Zilpah. They raise together 11 children, 11 sons, and a daughter, Dinah. And now finally Yaakov is on his way back to his parents' home, living in Hebron, where he left from, well, he left so many years earlier. And he's going to go back to Hebron, where his parents live, Yitzchak and Rivkah. And the story of Vayishlach is the journey back. Vayetze was the journey there, Vayishlach is the journey back. Of course, it opens up with him sending messengers to his brother Esav. He's looking for reconciliation, for peace, for coexistence. It continues with Yaakov preparing for possible war, confrontation. He prays, he sends a lavish gift to his brother, but they ultimately meet. And they meet, and it's a very moving moment of reconciliation. Esav hugs him and embraces him and falls on his neck, and they cry together. Esav wants them to live together. Yaakov says their time is not ripe yet. He continues his journey into Eretz Yisrael. He ends up in the region of Shechem. That's where tragedy strikes. Dinah is abducted, violated by the son of the mayor, by Shechem, the son of Tamar. The children of Yaakov destroy Shechem. Dinah is emancipated. Dinah is liberated. Yaakov is frightened that everybody's going to gang up against him and destroy him and his young family. At that point, Yaakov decides to return to the place called Bais El, that place that he was originally 20 years ago when he ran away from Eretz Yisrael to go to his uncle's house, Lavan. And that's where we're holding now in Parshas Vayishlach. Vayava Yaakov luza sheberetz Canaan, he Bais El hu v'chalam asher imay. Yaakov comes to a place called Luz in the land of Canaan. It's the same place that we called Bais El, he and the entire entourage, the people that are with him. Vayivin Sham, by the way, it's the first time that the title Am, nation, people, a nation is given to the Jewish family. Hu v'chal ha'am asher itay. I don't think there's anything before that they're called an Am. It's really a family, you don't have a nation. But that's an interesting thing to notice. Vayivin Sham Mizbeach, vayikra la'makim El Bais El, ki Sham niglu elav ha'alim bevarchim epnei Achiv. He builds an altar, and he calls the place Kel, Bais Kel, the place of Hashem, the house of Hashem, because over there Hashem revealed himself to him when he escaped from the wrath of his brother. Next pasuk, pasuk Ches. V'Tamas Devorah meinekes Rivka. Devorah, the nurse of Rivkah, passed away. V'tikaver mitachas leBais El. And she was buried below this space, this region called Bais El, tachas ha'aloin, below the oak tree. Vayikra shmoi aloin bachus. So he, apparently Yaakov, calls the name of this place where she was buried aloin bachus, which means the oak tree of tears, or the oak tree of weeping, of sobbing, of grief, of mourning. Aloin is a tree, it's an oak tree. Bachus comes from the word bechi, like vayifku, livkot, the oak tree of sadness. Next verse, pasuk tes. Vayera lehim el Yaakov oid bevoid me padanam vayivarech Isai. Hashem now appears to Yaakov again when he returns from Padan Aram, that's the place of Lavan, and he blesses him. Vayoyim Elohe lehim shimcha Yaakov le'yikare shimcha Yaakov kim Yisrael yishmech v'yikra shma Yisrael. Hashem also confirms his name change. Your name is Yaakov, but that should not be your name any longer. Yisrael should be your name, and Hashem calls his name Yisrael. And then the verse continues. They continue the travels. Rachel gives birth to Binyamin. She passes away. Yaakov buries her at Beis Lechem. Shortly after, there's a story of Reuven with Bilhah. Then there is the list of Yaakov's family's names. Then there is the story of Yaakov coming back home to meet his father Yitzchak in Hebron. Yitzchak passes away at 180. He's buried by Yaakov and Esav in the cave of Machpelah. And then the end of the parsha is the genealogy of Esav's family. And that's the story. So there is a flow. Yaakov comes back home at last with his family. Then we have the genealogy of his brother's family. But in this pasuk comes right in the middle, smack in the middle of this whole thing. He's returning, and suddenly a person dies. Devorah. We never heard of Devorah before. Devorah's name was not mentioned anywhere in Chumash, but she is identified as Rivka's nurse, Meinekes of Rivka, the wet nurse of Rivka, apparently, somebody who nursed Rivka. And we know that she was buried, and it's so significant to the fact that Yaakov gives this place a name. And the name of the place is, we know it's near Bethel, the house of Hashem, because Hashem revealed himself back 20 years earlier and now again. But this place, right near Bais or under Bais is Aloin Bachus, the oak tree of tears. And the obvious question is, who is this lady? And whoever she is, the nurse of Rivka, why is this story transcribed in Chumash? There's no context, there's no sequence. What was she doing here? How does it come into this place in Torah where it's mamish literally interrupts the narrative? Literally, no connection to before, no connection to after. So this is something that any student reads and you take pause. So Rashi, the great commentator on Chumash, gives us the background. And he fills in some of the gaps. To understand this, as always in Tanakh, you have to ask yourself, do we remember this person from before? Well, the Torah gives a hint. The nurse of Rivka. Rivka had a nurse, somebody nursed him. Rivka had somebody nursed her, sorry. Rivka had a wet nurse. Who is this? Do we remember this? So for this, we go back a few portions earlier when Rivka travels from that very same region where Yaakov is coming from, the home of her father Psuel, her brother Lavan, where her son Yaakov returned to so many years earlier. And if you go to the next source in your source sheet, Chaye Sarah Chav Daled Nun Zayin Nun Ches. Back to Genesis chapter 24. Now we're in chapter 35. We go back to chapter 24, verses 57 and 58. The servant of Avram has come. He encountered Rivka at the well. He feels she is the best soulmate for his master's son Yitzchak. He goes to her parents' home, to her brother's home. He stays the night. He speaks to them. He shares with them the entire story. He tells them about Avram and about Yitzchak and about the long journey and how he met Rivka at the well with the camels and her kindness and graciousness and benevolence and selflessness that she displayed. And he really feels this is the right Kala, the right bride for his master's son Yitzchak. When push comes to shove, they hesitate. They're ambivalent. Maybe she should wait. She's not ready. And that's when the suggestion is, let's ask Rivka. Vayikru le Rivka. They call Rivka. They tell her, do you want to go with this man? She says, Eilech, I will go. It's called decisiveness. One word. Not even two words. Eilech, I will go. Vayishalchu es Rivka achoisam ve'es meinikta. They sent Rivka, their sister. Lavan sent her off. It's his sister. Ve'es meinikta. Meinikta, her nurse. Ve'es Eved Avram, and the servant of Avram. Ve'es Amnoshav, and his people. And what happens next? Vayevarchu es Rivka. They bless Rivka. Vayoymru la, and they tell her, Achoiseinu, O sister, Atayi la alfei revava v'yir zarech es shar sainov. May you grow into thousands of myriads. May your offspring seize the gates of their foes. And this became an immortal pasuk, not only because it's a verse in Chumash, but in many, many Jewish communities till this very day. Moments before the Kala will go to the chuppah as she's being covered with the shawl, at the Badekanish, by her groom. Just like Rivka, our matriarch Rivka, it says when she met Yitzchak, Vatika Chatzoye Vatiskas, she veiled herself. This blessing is offered to every Jewish bride, Achaiseinu, our sister, Atayila Alfei Revava, may you grow into thousands of myriads. So here it is. Rivka had a nurse, and the Torah makes sure that we know about it, even though it doesn't seem relevant to the story. The story is, there's so many details that we don't know about the story. We don't know, for example, who was Rivka's mother. Her name is not mentioned, even though she must have been part of the story. The Mefarshim struggle. She shows up in the beginning, and then later she's gone. What happened? Did she pass away? Did she not pass away? But the Torah only gives very, very few details in every story, those that are relevant to understand the history, to understand the story, and to provide lessons. But this is important. Who came with Rivkah? Somebody the Torah calls Meinikta. What does Meinikta mean? So usually in Hebrew, we speak about a child nursing, right? Is lahanik, to nurse. A Meinika is somebody who nurses the child. In this case, obviously, you would call her a wet nurse who was nursing Rivkah. But if you take a look in Targum Yonason, the next source, Umisas Devorah, Devorah died, Pidgugsa de Rivkah, the pedagogue of Rivkah. The pedagogue, you see, Pidgugsa is pedagogue. So Targum Yonason ben Uziel believes it's not just physically nursing, but actually, she was an educator. She was a mentor. She was the pedagogue of Rivkah. It's Rashi now who puts the two stories together. Rashi says in Vayishlach, Vatamas Devorah, Ma inyan Devorah b'Bais Yaakov. Who is this Devorah? How did she end up in the house of Yaakov? Why does she pass away here with Yaakov? Who is Devorah? We know about Dinah, we know Bilhah, we know Zilpah, we know Rachel, we know Leah. Who's Devorah? We never heard of Devorah. And why is she by Yaakov? Did he have another daughter? Is there another woman here that we didn't hear about that Lavan put in some other people? So Rashi says, when Yaakov was running away, Rivkah told him, go to my brother, stay there for a few years, and I will send somebody to fetch you. Rivkah sent Devorah, her own nurse, her pedagogue. She sent her from Eretz Yisrael back to her parents' home, her brother's home, Lotzes Misham, to take Yaakov back. Umesa baderech. And this woman died on the road. Midivrei Reb Moshe Hadarshan Lamadatiya. Rashi says, I learned this from the words of the famous Reb Moshe Hadarshan who explained the Tanakh. So Rashi says, now we have a fuller picture. We don't know who Devorah is, but we know that Rivkah had a nurse. And who was she? She played a major role because she escorted Rivkah from her home as a child to Yitzchak, and apparently she lived with Rivkah. Targum Yonason ben Uziel says she wasn't only a nurse, she was a pedagogue, she was a teacher. When Rivkah now needs somebody to bring Yaakov back from her brother's house, who does she send? She sends her own teacher, her own pedagogue, or her own nurse. So she now went back to Padar Aram. She spent time with Yaakov and his family. She is the one who's bringing Yaakov back, and on the road back to Eretz Yisrael, she passed away. Obviously, she was very old because she was older than Rivkah, who was Yaakov's mother. And that's how this comes in here. That's what Rashi is telling us. In fact, the Targum Yerushalmi uses the word Marbiyasa de Rivkah, the one who raised Rivkah, similar to the pedagogue. Literally like a mother, a mentor, a teacher, a mother, she raised Rivkah. And by the way, how old was Rivkah when she left? Rashi holds she was 3. The Chizkuni and others hold she was older. She was 13 already. So then a nurse doesn't mean she was nursing at 3, at 13. Even at 3, many people didn't nurse already. But it means somebody who was just always at her side, somebody who was there with her from birth, who might have nursed her in the past, but they developed a very deep kinship, and she was the one chosen to go with Rivkah, the only one from her household that came along with her to her new life. She was chosen to go, not her brother, not any other family member, but this woman who the Torah doesn't give us the name. Only later do we find out that her name is Devorah. If you want us to know the name, why don't you tell us the name the first time? You don't. First time you tell us the nurse. The second time when she passes away, oh, she has a name. Her name is Devorah. The Ramban asks a big question on Rashi. He says, I don't understand. It's a long journey. Remember, it's before the days of cars, and certainly before the days of aviation. There's no flying, and there's no cars. You have to now travel from Eretz Yisrael, where Rivkah lived, all the way to Iraq. It's a journey. By plane, it's not a long journey, but it's a journey. Rivkah needs to send somebody to give a message to Yaakov. Why would she send this elderly lady who was older than her? She doesn't go herself. She sends a shliach. The Rambam says, I don't understand. Why did Rivkah have to send this lady who was obviously much, much older? It's not even respectful. Find a shliach, find somebody who's younger, and send them. And he has to send, she sends a woman, not a man, which in those days especially, the way the culture, pagan culture was, it could be very dangerous. And somebody of such seniority and such age, such ripe old age. So the Ramban suggests maybe a different story. He says, who says that Rivka's wet nurse stayed with her all these years? She accompanied Rivka on the journey. Maybe she stayed for a while, to help her set up shop, right? You always need, if there's no shvigas and a shtakamama, so you need somebody to help you. So she helped her set up shop. She helped her set up the house. Maybe she stayed for a while. But ultimately, she went back to Mesopotamia. She went back to Haran. So she was there a whole time when Yaakov came, years later, because Yaakov is Rivka's son. And remember, Yaakov is only born 20 years after Rivka gets married. So you can understand how old this lady was. Rivka could not have children for many years. It was only 20 years after the wedding that Rivka has children. Yaakov only leaves to Lavan's house at the age of 63. We see these calculations from the Chumash because the Chumash gives us the years, the chronology. Rashi says it in a few places at the end of Toldos and other places. So the Ramban says to say that Rivka took this lady and sent her to Haran at this point. And remember, Yaakov went when he was 63. He's 14 years in the yeshiva of Shema Neva, and he's by Lavan 20 years. So now Rivka sent this lady. The Ramban says no. This lady went back right away, or maybe at some point, and she was always there. That's how she ended up in the family. She was part of the family. Maybe, the Ramban says, why did she leave now, stay there? Maybe she wanted to meet Rivka again. She missed Rivka. Her little child that she nursed so many years ago. She wanted to, her son is going to meet her. She also wants to go meet her. Maybe the Ramban says she was actually a tremendous helper in the house. She helped Yaakov and she helped Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah. She raised all the children. So they're not just going to leave her. They're going. She's also going with them. The Ramban says, who even says it's the same nurse that they sent along with Rivkah to Eretz Yisrael? Maybe this was another nurse of Rivkah. He said aristocratic, affluent families can have more than one wet nurse at those days, during those times. So maybe she always stayed. And maybe Yaakov now wanted to honor her in her old age and bring her with him to Eretz Yisrael to sustain her and support her and be there for her when she was older. And maybe she could also help his mother Rivkah. These are different suggestions the Ramban offers to avoid Rashi's idea that Rivkah sent this lady all the way from Eretz Yisrael back to Mesopotamia, back to Haran, to tell Yaakov, it's time to go home, son. Time to come back to the Holy Land. But Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says this was the same nurse that went with Rivkah to the Holy Land and now was sent back by Rivkah to bring back Yaakov. In Medrash, there's another twist to the story that makes it far more dramatic. Take a look in the next source, Medrash Agadah. Uma biksha Devorah etzel Yaakov. What was Devorah looking for by Yaakov? Why is she by Yaakov? If she's really the wet nurse of Rivkah, she should be in Israel, in the land of Canaan. Ella. Rivkah promised him, I will send somebody to take you there. She did. She sent somebody. But Yaakov didn't want to go. His mother sent somebody. It's time to come home. He didn't want to move. Ma'asasa Rivkah. What should Rivkah do? Her son doesn't want to leave Lavan. Shigra Devorah etzel Yaakov lahaviyah. Devorah was not the original shlucha. Devorah was the alternative because Yaakov was resisting. The Chizkuni, one of the great commentators on Chumash, says clearly, Lo ratza lavai. He didn't want to come. Udvorah sha'asayim Yaakov bebeis Lavan. So Devorah was sent and she had to spend time there to persuade him to leave. Umeisa baderech etzel Yaakov. and she died on the road with Yaakov, coming back to Eretz Yisrael. Ulefisha sasam lamayla shama kisha amar vayishalchu es Rivka achaisim es meinikta ba'achshav v'hiskir shma. The Chizkuni says the first time around she's mentioned in history, accompanying, escorting Rivka to her marriage. Doesn't say her name. So here the Torah fills in the gap and also adds her name. Why did Yaakov not want to leave Lavan? Perhaps you could say he was afraid. Even later, he sends messengers to Esav, and when he hears that Esav is approaching him, it says that Yaakov is terribly scared and stressed and overwhelmed. He's frightened that he and his family will be obliterated in the beginning of Vayishlach, so perhaps he's afraid. I understand. But why did Rivka feel that this nurse of hers could somehow convince him and eliminate his fear and have him come? Or according to Rashi, why is she the one that Rivka feels she has to send to bring him back home? Now we come to the next step. Please hold this in your mind. Be'ezra Hashem, we'll get back to it. Yaakov names this place Aloin Bachos. Very interesting. The tree of grief, or the tree of tears. What type of name is that? The tree of tears? I mean, is the tree crying? They needed a place to bury her. They buried her under a tree. That would be her tombstone. By the way, there are various historians over the generations who have identified large dramatic oak trees that throughout history were pointed to as this tree, Alon Bachos, where Devorah was buried. Whether it's mamish accurate or not accurate, I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, but I'm just telling you, it's a very interesting study that was done over the generations. There were trees in the area of Bethel, because we know where ancient Bethel was. There's the modern Bethel that was built by Ketzel, Rabbi Yaakov Katz. That's like 2 kilometers of the original biblical Bethel. And over there's some very interesting oak trees. One very large one that they have attributed for many generations. They say it was transmitted from generation to generation that this is the Aloin Bachas. But he calls the tree a tree of weeping. So our sages say there may be a different interpretation. Alon in Greek means another, a second one, an additional one. Alon Bachas then means not just the tree, the oak of grief, but another grief. There is a second form of grief. And Rashi explains it to us. Rashi says the next one, Rashi Vayishlach Lamed Heiches, Va'agada, there's an agada, meaning a homiletic teaching of our sages. Nisbaser Sham Be'evel Sheni Shehugad Loyal Imoy Shemesa. At that moment, Yaakov heard another piece of news. His mother Rivkah passed away. Va'aloin beloshin yevani acher. Aloin in Greek language means another one. So meaning there's 2 reasons for grief, 2 reasons for sobbing. One is Rivka's nurse, and one is Rivkah herself. Obviously, this raises a major question. The Torah dedicates a verse to describe her nurse's death, her nurse's burial, and not a word about Rivka's death and Rivka's burial. In fact, nowhere in the Torah does it say that Rivkah passed away. Says Rashi, Ulefisha limu es yoy moisa. They concealed the day of her death. People should not curse the womb from where Esav emerged, so they hid the day of her death, because that's the day everybody talks about, Mishpacha, the Kinderlach, the family. So therefore, the Torah too conceals it. The concealment of Rivka's death is a reflection of the reality of how she passed away. Now, this is obviously a fascinating Rashi and a fascinating teaching. Rashi takes it from the Medrash, that the Torah does not speak of Rivka's death explicitly. In fact, the Medrash says that right after this pasuk, the next pasuk is, as we learned earlier, Vayera L'kim El Yaakov Vayevarich Oisoi, pasuk Tes, Lamed Hey Tes. Hashem blessed Yaakov. Why? So the Medrash says, Nicham Avelim. This was comforting the Yaakov who was in mourning for his mother. After Avram's death, it says Hashem blessed Yitzchak. Vayachrei Mois Avram, Vayevarich Elokim es Yitzchak b'nai. That's back in Parshas Chayisara. Why? So Chazal say Hashem. It was like a shiva call, a nicham avelim, to bless and give chizuk strength to Yitzchak. Here again, after Rivka's death, Yaakov is sitting shiva. Yaakov is in great mourning, not just for his nurse, but for his mother's nurse, but for his mother herself, for his mother, Rivkah, so Hashem blesses him. Nichem Avela. The obvious question is, the Ramban says, Leah's death is also not recorded in the Torah. The Torah, we have a record of Sarah's passing, Rachel's passing, which is going to be the next story in Vayishlach, and her burial, and the tomb, the matzeva that Yaakov erects on her grave in Beit Lechem till this very day. But we don't have a record not of Rivkah, we also don't have of Leah. So why suddenly by Rivkah is it such a question? Many of the deaths in Torah are not recorded. Sarah, yeah, Sarah with long elaboration. Rachel, yeah, but not Leah either. So the Ramban says it's different. Because here you see that the Torah does intimate that she passed away by using the word aloin, which in Greek means there's another form of weeping. So it's like you're intimating it, but in a hidden way. Besides the fact we see that Hashem blesses Yaakov afterwards, as we said, with Nichem Avelim. Besides the fact, Yaakov is going to come back to his father after this story, to Hebron, and it doesn't say he comes back to his mother, which is strange. She's the one who sent him away. When he comes back, the Torah should say he came back to his father and his mother, especially that she loved him so dearly, especially that she gave up so much for him. When he comes back, shouldn't it say he came back to his father and mother? It doesn't say. It says he came back to his father. Obviously, the mother wasn't there. So she passed away. So the Torah is showing us that she passed away already. And here it's intimated that this is the point. So Chazal say, so why not say it explicitly? The Chidah has a sefer called Chaimas Anach, and he brings from Rabbeinu Ephraim that the words, it says here, Meinika Rivka, Vatamas Devorah, Meinekes Rivka. So he says, Meinekes Rivka is the numerology of the words, Af Rivka Meisa Boy Bayoim. Also Rivka died the same day. You could do the math. Meinekes Rivka is the same numerical value as Af Rivka Meisa Boy Bayoim. But it's through gematria, it's through hints, it's through remazim, through intimations. Why not explicit? So Rashi says, because they hid it. It was a hidden story. So nobody would say anything bad about Rivkah. 1 second. But Yitzchak also was the father of Esav. And in this parsha soon, Yaakov comes home to Yitzchak. Yitzchak passes away, and Esav buries him with Yaakov. Why is nobody going to curse Yitzchak? They could say the same derogatory words about Yitzchak. Why don't you hide Yitzchak's death? Why was Yitzchak's death public? The answer to this, the Medrash makes clear, the Ramban makes clear, many commentators make clear, is it was very different. Because when Rivkah passed away, Yitzchak could not go to the funeral. Yitzchak could not be involved with her burial as Avram was with Sarah, because he couldn't see. And at that time, he was confined in his home and he couldn't deal with it. Yaakov was far away. Yaakov was traveling back from Padan Aram to Eretz Yisrael. He wasn't even there. So who would be the one and only family member to deal with Rivkah? It would be Esav. When Yitzchak passed away, you had Yaakov and Esav and all the grandchildren. But when Rivkah would pass away, it would be only Esav. Esav would run the show. That they did not want to happen for obvious reasons. So therefore, Rivkah's death and burial were clandestine. That's the meaning of it. Because the only one who would deal with it would be Esav. There was nobody else around. The Ramban even adds it could be that Esav didn't even show up for her funeral, or wouldn't, because he had a lot of issues with his mother Rivkah. That's what the Ramban says. So that means nobody would be there. So who buried her? The Bnei Ches. Nobody in the family, literally alone. Bnei Ches, not Yitzchak, not Yaakov, not Esav. So the Torah decides, so the whole thing was done in a hidden way, in a clandestine way. So that's why what happened is reflected in the Torah. The Torah shears that same dignity that Rivkah's passing is hinted to, but only in a hinted fashion. This is how the Mefarshim explain it. When Yaakov hears about this, it creates tremendous grief, and we can understand. Rivkah was the one who sent him away. Rivkah was the one who wanted to save his life from Esav. Rivkah was the one who told Yitzchak he's going to find a shidduch by her brother Lavan. Rivkah is the one who got him to get the blessings. Rivkah is the one who loved him very dearly. And now after all these years, he finally is coming home and he wants to meet Rivkah and give her what we call nachas. Here are the results. Here you have 12 beautiful kinderlach. With Dinah, 13 beautiful kinderlach. But Yaakov would never be able to do that. because Rivkah passed away. So there was a special sense of mourning and grief and loss that we can imagine exists in Yaakov's heart, besides the fact that none of his wives, none of his children, the grandchildren, would ever be able to meet Rivkah, even though they go and they meet Yitzchak. What happens right after this? Hashem blesses him, and he changes his name from Yaakov to Yisrael. So there's a lot going on in this pasuk, you see. Looks like an innocent pasuk. Devorah died. She happened to be the nurse of Rivkah. Yaakov buries her. There's a lot going on in this pasuk, and it's a complete interruption, ostensibly, from the whole flow of the narrative. In order to spice up the dish, let's take it one step further and ask ourselves, the name Devorah, who else do we know as Devorah? Very good. Devorah is a very popular Jewish name, a beautiful Jewish name. I had a grandmother who was named, my father's grandmother's name was Devorah Hoda. Devorah Hoda. But we know in Tanakh, if we go to the book of Shoftim, Perik Daled and Hey, we have that great personality in Jewish history called the Devorah HaNaviah, one of the prophetess of the Jewish people, and the Shira of Devorah, the song of Devorah, is one of the most beautiful songs, inspiring songs in the whole of Tanakh. But there's something very strange about how Devorah is introduced the first time. We now travel hundreds of years. Rivkah passed away. Rivkah's nurse Devorah passed away. Yaakov comes back to Hebron. Ultimately, he would relocate to Egypt. The Jews would spend in Egypt 210 years. They would ultimately leave, come to Eretz Yisrael. And over the next few hundred years, they would be ruled by shoftim, by judges. And in that period, hundreds of years after this story, we are introduced to another woman, a woman named Devorah. So take a look in your next source sheet, Shoftim Perik Dalet Pasuk Dalet. Judges, chapter 4, verse 4. Udvorah isha neviah eshes lapidos yishoftes Yisrael beisahi. Devorah is a prophet. She is the wife of a man named Lapidos. Chazal say Lapidos means a torch like lapid. Her husband was very unlearned and illiterate, and she used to weave wicks for him. He should take it to the Mishkan, and they use it for the menorah. And she wanted there should be light everywhere, so she made Lapidos. It wasn't just thin little wicks, but dense, thick wicks that would generate intense light. That's just in commentary in parentheses how they explain Lapidos. She is the judge of the Jewish people at that time. Now these are strong words. Shofta means she is the judge. She is the ruler. When there's a problem, when there's a dilemma, when there are challenges, when there are decisions to make, everybody is coming to Devorah. She sits under the palm tree. Tamar is, like the word Tamarim. Tamarim are dates that grow on the palm. So she sits under the palm of Devorah, the palm tree of Devorah. Bein harama ubein Bais El Bahar Ephraim Vayalo Elebnei Yisrael Mishpat. It's located between a place called Ramah, a place called Bethel, obviously in the Holy Land, and the Jewish people ascend to her for every mishpat, for all judgment, for decisions to be made. Chazal famously say, why under a palm tree? And they answer, because everybody came to her, including all of the Jewish men. So in order to maintain the modesty, the tznius, she didn't want to be in a home. People come with private questions and private issues and private dilemmas. So therefore, it was still private. Nobody came into the palm tree, but it was open in the field, in the orchard. That's why she sat under Tamar Devorah near between Ramah and Bethel. And the next scene, she summons Barak. Barak, who was a great Jewish leader at the time, and she says to him, it's time to take some initiative. The story is that the Jewish people were being oppressed for 20 years by a Canaanite king called Yavin, the king of a tribe called Chatzar, and he had his commander-in-chief was a man named Sisera. Sisera was one of the mightiest and scariest warriors of ancient times. He had 900 chariots that were fearsome. Chazal describe his physical, awesome, intense strength, and how he treated his enemies with brutality and ruthlessness. And Sisera was the nightmare of the Jewish people. For 20 years, they were in constant fear and dread of the tyrants of the age. And Devorah, the prophet, tells Barak, go to war. Take 10,000 people from the tribe of Naphtali, go to war. Barak doesn't want to. He's hesitant. He's scared. He's scared. So what does she say? What does he say to her? Interesting answer. The answer may be familiar to some of you. Vayomer eleha Barak, Barak said, Im telchi imi v'halachti, im lo yselchi imi lo yelech. If you come with me, I'll go. If you don't come with me, I'm not going. So what does Devorah say? She gives him a characteristic answer. Haloich elech imach. I'll go with you. Ephes. However, ki lo yeh tefartecha al haderech asher tahelech ki biyad isha yimker Adonai sisra v'takom Devorah v'telech im Barak kadesh. No problem. But I hope it won't be too difficult for your ego when everybody's going to say that it was the woman who scored victory and it was the woman who defeated Sisera. God allowed Sisera to be surrendered into the hands of a woman. I'm happy to go with you. But remember, you're not going to be able to take the credit. It may be hard for you. If you're fine with it, gesundheit. But Barak is desperate. Without Devorah's support, he can't do this. And he goes, and Devorah comes with him. And we know the continuation of the story. They go to war. Sisera has and experiences an excruciatingly painful defeat. His people, his troops are killed. He himself runs. And he enters into the tent of another woman, the wife of Chaver Hakeni, who their family was close with the Sisera regime, and he thinks she will offer protection. He is so exhausted, he is tired, and he's thirsty. She famously gives him a lot of milk. He falls asleep, and in the midst of his sleep, she kills him. Sisera with a peg, a hammer and a peg. And then Devorah sings this amazing shira. Shakamti Ein Yisrael, a mother of Israel, has arose. And the end of the shira is, of course, about another woman, the mother of Sisera, who awaits in her home, standing by the window, waiting for the general, for her child to come back with all the booty. She turns to her friends, other women. Why is Sisera not back? She expects that her son would bring so much booty. A mother's hunch usually is often correct that something happened. The women say, no, he murdered so many Jews. There's so much booty. There's so much to collect. That's why it's taking time. But she, of course, knows better. And that's really how this shira ends. So it's interesting. At the surface, if somebody would look at the story from the surface, it's a story about men. Barak fighting Sisera and Yavin. When you read it in the Tanakh, you see that's on the surface. Behind the surface, it's completely about women. Devorah was behind it. Sisera was killed by a woman, and Sisera's mother is who Devorah decides to write about and sing about when she does the shira of the war, even though her Sisera's mother had nothing to do with it. She was back home waiting to give her son a nice dinner and enjoy some of the booty when he returned from war, as she always did so many times before. But here is now a question. It seems technical, but it's not so technical. The Tanakh identifies her and says, "V'hi yosheves tachas toimer Devorah." She sat under the palm tree of Devorah. Who gave it this name? She gave it the name. She went under a palm tree and she said, okay, sign, toimer Devorah. I understand after her life, they would name it toimer Devorah. This is the palm of Devorah. In fact, there's a very famous book of Jewish ethics called Toimer Devorah by Rabbeinu Moshe Cordovero, the Ramak. He was one of the greatest Kabbalists. He lived in Sfas in the 1500s. He's buried in the old cemetery in Sfas, right near the Arizal, who was a student. He passed away 1570 in Tammuz, Chav Gimel Tammuz. He wrote a sefer on Musar, ethics, called Toimer Devorah, the palm tree of Devorah, where he explains how you can apply the 13 attributes of compassion in your own life so that your attributes mirror Hashem's attributes. It's a fascinating, extraordinary book, Toimer Devorah. So I understand after her lifetime, we point to that palm tree and we say that's the palm tree of Devorah. But the Tanakh says she was sitting under Toimer Devorah. Who gave it that name? She gave it the name. This is Toimer Devorah. So the Das Kenim, take a look in your next source. The Das Kenim says something quite fascinating. Das Kenim, Vatamas Devorah, Medrash. Ki mashakos of Gabi Devorah Hanaviya v'Yosheves Tachas Toima Devorah. When it says by Devorah that she sat under the palm tree of Devorah, you know which Devorah that is? It's not her. It's another Devorah. Zeu aloin bachos Devorah dahacha. She was sitting under that tree. Aloin from the word elon. You could translate, they usually translate it as an oak, but maybe it was a palm. It was an elon. Toime Devorah. That was the palm of Devorah. But it's interesting. In our parsha, it's called aloin. Over there, it's called toimer, a palm. But it's the same tree. That's why it was Toime Devorah. Remember, this is the tree where Yaakov buried Devorah, Rivka's nurse, and it was a significant story. He gave it a name, Aloin Bachos. The Torah decides to write about it. It's where he grieved for his mother Rivkah. This was a location. This was a region that was known. People pointed to it. That's where Devorah decided to become the shofetes, to judge and lead and inspire the Jewish people, including where she sent her message, from where she sent the message to Barak to fight Sisera. Paneach Raza says, Vatamas Devorah, Zo Shomer Akasavi Yesheves Tachas Toime Devorah Kaloimar, Tachas HaIlon Shekvura Sham Devorah. Moedenu Harav Reb Aaron. Toime Devorah is she was sitting by the tree where Devorah was buried, under that tree by Yaakov Avinu, hundreds and hundreds of years earlier. And now I ask you, what is the connection? It's nice, Devorah. Whether we say that it means physically, she simply chose that tree and that's where she spent her days. Or the Chazal and Medrash are connecting it symbolically. What in the world is the connection besides the name Devorah? What was their point? What is the relationship, the link between these two events, these two stories that seem completely remote from each other on every level? This is the nurse of Rivkah, who happened to be sent to bring Yaakov back. This is a woman, a prophet, a Jewess who's leading the Jewish people hundreds of years later, but she chooses that same place. You mind if I put in one more spice? One more spice. We now go to the world of Kabbalah. There's a sefer called Gilgulei Neshamas, Reincarnation of Souls, that was written by a man named Ramemi Fanu, Rabbeinu Menachem Azariah of Fanu, Italy. He lived in the 17th century. He was a student from the students of the Arizal, whom I just mentioned, part of the group of Kabbalists in Svas in the 1500s. And he has a sefer about reincarnations based on the teachings of the Arizal. And here is what he writes. Tamar hi Devorah. The soul of Tamar, who we're going to learn about in next week's Parsha, Vayeshev, that soul was reincarnated into Devorah the prophetess. The Siman, here is the Siman. Tachas Toime Devorah Chaser Ksiv. When it says in Tanakh, in Judges 4, that Devorah sat under the palm tree of Devorah, Toimer is spelled with a Vav, but in the Tanakh it's without a Vav, so it could be read as Tamar Devorah. Tamar is Devorah. V'sham hoisa yosheves. You know why Devorah used to sit there? Says Darizal, L'sakein ma sheyashva bepesach einayim v'yachsheveha l'zayna. Remember, why did Yehuda think that Tamar is, so to speak, an immoral woman, a Zayna? Why did he think so? So the Torah says, because she was sitting, she dressed up, she camouflaged herself, so nobody recognized who she is. Vateshev bepesach einayim. She sat at an open road, at an open place, an exposed place. Yehuda naturally thought that she is an immoral woman. She summoned Yehuda, he summoned her, and the continuation of the story says Darizal, that soul was her soul was reincarnated into Devorah. So she sat by Tamar Devorah, because she is Tamar, and this was the continuation of that story. Tamar sat there, he doesn't say Tamar sat there, but Tamar sat in an open place, but it was perceived as a sign of immorality. Devorah would also sit in an open place, this time in a very manifested way as a spiritual sage and leader and prophet of God, inspiring, speaking, advising, and guiding and mentoring the Jewish people. And here again, what's the connection between Tamar and Toime Devorah, besides the fact that Tamar is spelled without a Vav? So Avram's servant, Eliezer, is looking for a match for Yitzchak. It's not just a regular match. This is the future of the Jewish people. Avram and Sarah were barren for most of their life. At the age of 90, Sarah has a child. She didn't believe she would. She has one and only one. Yishmael is not a natural heir of Avram Avinu, even though he's biologically a child through Hagar. And now Yitzchak is 40 years old, and he does not have a future at the moment. He's not married. He was almost died at the Akedah. And this is when Avram tells his servant, I need you to go and find the appropriate woman who would become the matriarch of the Jewish people. Sarah passed away, his wife Sarah passed away, and this would be the future of Klal Yisrael, the future of the Jewish people. We know the story. Eliezer travels. He finds Rivkah at the well, but the family is ambivalent. The one who decides she has to go is Rivkah. When they ask her, do you want to go? Naturally, we would think, whether she's 3 years old or 13 years old, the natural inclination would be, not yet, let me stay home. But Rivkah obviously feels in her bones that this is her destiny. This is the ultimate journey that will be the greatest thing for her and for her future. And Rivkah goes. Eilech. We all know the Medrash says in the Shir Hashirim, in the Song of Songs, is a famous pasuk. Kishoshana bein hachuchim, kein rayasi bein habonos. Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the other women. Says the Medrash that this refers to Rivkah. Rivkah was the Shoshana, the lily, bein hachuchim, among thorns, and Eliezer, the servant of Avram, is trying to extract her. And he does. He extracts a lily from many thorns, Psuel and Lavan, and the whole environment which was steeped in pagan idolatry, as the Midrashim and the commentators explain. But Rivkah doesn't go alone. Somehow everybody, they know, the family knows. Vayishalchu. When they send Rivkah, as we did in the original Psukim, they send her, Vayishalchu es Rivkah achaisem ve'esmei nikta. There's a woman who's sent with her. Targum Yonasim ben Uziel says not just a technical nurse, which is not so technical. Nursing a child is not technical. I don't mean it in that sense. But it means she wasn't only doing a physical job of giving this special girl the nutrients and the milk that she needed. But as the Targum Yonasim says, she was a pedagogue. She was a mentor. She was a teacher. Somehow Rivkah needs her to be at her side. This is perhaps the person who recognizes the lily among the thorns. The one who identifies the Shoshana bein hachuchim and nurses her not just physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. This is Rivkah's attachment. This is Rivkah's connection. This is somebody who not only believes in Rivkah, but somebody who helped mold and craft Rivkah. Remember, nursing in Tanakh is never seen as a technical thing. Till today, it's not a technical thing. It really represents those deepest emotional connections and relationships. Besides the fact that the milk of a mother is how God created nature to give a growing infant the amazing nutrients it needs. Besides the fact, the bonding that is created on an emotional level, what we call today the attachment versus detachment, is so vital and fundamental to the life of a child. Maybe one of the most fundamental things to the life of a child, their attachment in earliest months and earliest years to their primary caretakers. Today, cutting-edge psychology is about how we suffer from the lack of attachment during those primal moments in our life when the attachment that we desperately needed might have not been there. Maybe there was physical attachment. We had shelter and food, but not the emotional attachment. A child needs the 4 S's: to be heard, to be seen, and to be soothed, and to be secure and safe. Later, Leah would name her children with these names. Reuven, the first thing a child needs is to be seen. Shimon, a child needs to be heard. Levi, a child needs attachment. Levi means connected, ye love her. Yehuda, child has to feel that you're grateful for their existence, that ultimate deep love and acceptance. Those are the first 4 children that Leah would bring into the Jewish people before the other children who have their own names. Every child needs to be seen and heard and feel attachment and feel that you're grateful for them. We can end the class now, no? You never end. This is infinity. We don't end. Now Rivkah is leaving. She doesn't have her family with her. And in many ways, they couldn't even be there for her when you have a lily among thorns. It's a different type of soul, different type of priorities. But this Meinekes Rivkah is her pedagogue. If Rivkah is the matriarch of the Jewish people, so the pedagogue of Rivkah must have had some soul, some mind, some great qualities. She will be there at her side. She will remind her who she is. She will stay connected to her. And not just a few years later, years later, you're talking about decades, a century later, the Torah will still call her the nurse of Rivkah. You might say it's a little disrespectful. Imagine you turn to your 100-year-old grandmother, right? You turn to a woman who's very old and say, by the way, she was the nurse of your Baba. At this point, you would think Rivkah is much older, she's much older, but till the end, her death, she's identified as the nurse of Rivkah. Obviously, this was no small event, but rather this is this person. She had that ability to be the Pedagogue, in the words of the Targum Yonasan, the mentor, the one who raised her physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually as she leaves her environment and has to embark on a completely new life without physical family attachment. And of course, as she's leaving, the blessing is given to her. And we see it's not just a blessing, you could say it's Lavan's blessing, it's a ridiculous blessing. The blessing makes it into Torah, and the blessing becomes a blessing that's still today given to Jewish brides by the Badekanish. When they bless Rivkah and they say to her, Achoseinu, at hayi la'alfei revava. Oh sister, our sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads, and may your offspring seize the gates of their foes. What's the significance of this blessing? First of all, it's a blessing about Rivkah. May you become that progenitor of Alfei Revava. Alfei Revava. But there's always something else. When it says your descendants shall seize, shall inherit the gates of their foes, Shar Sainov, it doesn't only mean literally they should go and conquer the cities of their enemies, so they will conquer and seize the gates of their foes. If Rivkah is a little girl, why are we right now talking about all the wars that her descendants are going to have? It's interesting, though, that if Lavan is giving this blessing, most people, when they give a blessing, it's a blessing about today, tomorrow. Some people talk about after tomorrow. If you mamish have vision, you talk about 6 months. And if you're a gigantic, extraordinary visionary, you talk about 2 years. But you see how people thought, even Lavan and Psuel, who were not considered the holiest, how they thought about life and history. They're not even talking about tomorrow. You can't become thousands and myriads in a day, a week, a decade, even a century. Their blessing was Acheseinu atayi la'alfei revava v'yir zarech shar Sainov. But the truth is, Sainov is not just enemies from without. There's also enemies from within. We all have internal enemies representing the obstacles that obstruct our energy, that obstruct our creativity, that deplete us from our potential, that make us exhausted and tired. And they're blessing Rivkah that your descendants shall have that ability to be able to seize the portal of the enemies. In other words, to be able to seize and inherit and control it. So not only do their inner enemies not defeat them, but to the contrary. Isn't Shoshana a rose? Why did I translate it as lily? It's a good question. It's a great question. Yeah, Shoshana is a rose, but actually, I remembered the expression lilies among thorns. So I went to Sepharia this morning, and I went to that verse in Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs, chapter 2, and I see the translation like a lily among the thorns. So I pass on the question to Sepharia.com. Lilies don't have thorns. Okay, I hear you.
Those people who are named Shoshana in Yiddish, they
are Arois. Okay, Rezel. Thank you. I could say I stand corrected. I don't have the right to say Sepharia stands corrected. They will have to do it on their own. Now this mentor of Rivkah hears all of this, and she's the escort. She's standing at her side. She's her teacher. She's her guide. But as life begins, she sees it's not so rosy. or Lily, pun intended. It's not going so simple. Of course, she marries Yitzchak. She gets to meet Avram Avinu. Sarah already passed away. It says Yitzchak loved her and cherishes her. But Rivka is an akara. Rivka can't have a child. It takes 20 years until Rivka will become pregnant. The pregnancy, as we know, is very tumultuous. And finally, the twins are born, Yaakov and Esav. But even at this point, the nurse of Rivka sees that things are far from simple. That blessing, Achaisenu ateyi la'alfei revava, may you grow into thousands and myriads, doesn't seem like it's going to materialize, at least not in the near future. Esav is completely on his own journey. Yaakov, at the age of 63, is still not married. He got the blessings from his father, which Rivka initiated, but now Esav wants to kill him. So the wet nurse of Rivka, the nurse of Rivka, the pedagogue of Rivka, watches Rivka calling in Yaakov and saying, run for your life because your brother is going to kill you. So now Yaakov at 63 is not married, doesn't have a child. Rivka is now alone with Yitzchak. They have no other child besides Esav, who chose a different path in life. But this meinekes of Rivka still remains that pedagogue. She still remains that mentor. So Rivka doesn't have doubts. Rivka is confident of the blessing. Rivka remembers Da'achasenu atayila alfei revava. Rivka knows what Avraham was speaking about, and she knows what Hashem promised Avraham Avinu. And Rivka tells Yaakov, go, you'll come back, things will be fine. Yaakov is there for 20 years. The number 20 is significant. He tells Lavan, Esrim shana anoichi beveisach. Because later, Devorah, when she sends a message to Barak, the Torah Tanakh makes sure to point out one verse before that they were oppressed for 20 years. 20 years they suffered under the tyranny of Sisera and under the tyranny of Yavin, the king of Chatzar. Yaakov Avinu is afraid. Even when Yaakov Avinu starts coming back, he comes back to Eretz Yisrael. He even reconciled with Esav. Everything is working out. Hashem said, I'll be with you. I'm going to protect you. He's coming back. He has children. The future is beginning to develop. Things are rosy at this point, it seems. Suddenly, he encounters the story of Shechem. His own daughter, his one daughter, is abducted and violated. His sons Shimon and Levi destroy Shechem. And if you look in the next source, what does Yaakov tell them? Yaakov says, "Vayomer Yaakov al Shimon ve'Levi, achartem oisi lavisheni b'yoshev haaretz b'knani b'prizi v'ani mesei mispor v'nesvo lai v'ikuni v'nishmadati ani uvesi." Yaakov tells Shimon and Levi, you have made me achartem oisi. Achartem oisi means you have made me seem repulsive and disgusting among all the inhabitants of this land, the Canaanim and the Prizim. And we have small number, we are a small family. What's going to happen is they will all assemble together, smite me and the whole family will be obliterated. Before this family can even begin developing into a nation, we will already be experiencing our own demise. They will write our obituary. This is the feeling that Yaakov is experiencing after he left Lavan, he made it out. After he already transcended the fear with Esav. Esav hugged him and kissed him. Now, this new tzara, tzaras dina, and now this, Yaakov says, there's no hope. It's not even one enemy anymore. When they see what happened with Shechem, this is what he says to Shimon and Levi. When they see what happened to Shechem, they will not allow us to live. The Ramban brings from Sefer HaYashar that at this point, Yaakov was engaged in many wars. This wasn't just a futile fear. They came to declare war on Yaakov and his family, and this was what he was afraid of. Now, Shimon and Levi respond and say, "Hachazoyna yases achiseinu." We can't allow our sister to be treated this way. Got it. But Yaakov says, look at the results. The results is there won't be a family left. We will be destroyed. When Yaakov is by Lavan, and Rivka sends the first messenger to bring him back, he doesn't want to go. There's a lot of fear. So the Medrash says, who does she decide to send? Who is she going to send to help Yaakov get out of that comfort zone by Lavan, come back to settle his own land, despite the challenges. So Rivkah has to choose somebody. Who is she going to choose? So she chooses the person who stood by her side as her pedagogue, watching all those long, lonely years filled with doubt and uncertainty and fear. But this human being, who she always called her nurse, her teacher, her pedagogue, she can go to Yaakov. And she will serve as an eternal link between a previous generation and telling Yaakov, I was there. When Rivkah, your mother, heard those words, Yaakov, don't be afraid. You can do it. We will do it. This is who Rivkah sends. Rashi doesn't say this point that Yaakov was afraid to leave. But Rashi also says that Rivkah sent her. Why did she send her? Now we can understand why she sent her. Because this journey, which will be complicated and complex, Rivkah knew just like she had somebody on her side. When she was a very little girl, Yaakov, who had a bunch of little children, will also perhaps need that person to be able to encourage him, to motivate him, to tell him that you could come back to the land. It's time for you to settle your eternal homeland. The fact is, as it's brought in Svarim and Kabbalah and Chassidus, that women have a koyach ha'amunah, a power of deep, innate, organic faith and resilience that often men don't have in such a manifested way. She did it with Rivkah, and she will now be able to do it with Yaakov. We see it, by the way, a little later in history with Miriam. We once gave a long class about this. Amram separates from his wife Yocheved because Parai is killing all the children. And it's Miriam who tells her father, you're worse than Parai. Parai made a decree for the males, you made a decree for the females. Parai will die one day, your decree will last. Parai is a Russia, you're a Jew. Parai is killing them in Olam Hazeh, you're not even allowing Jews to be born. She convinces her father to remarry her mother. She is the one who says that we're going to have a child who will redeem the Jewish people, and then the child is born. And Yocheved has to put him in the Nile in a basket because he's not going to survive. They're going to cast him into the river. Now, what are the chances a baby is going to survive in a basket in the Nile Delta? Either he'll starve, he'll die from thirst, the basket will capsize, or an Egyptian will come and just drown the baby like they did every other Jewish baby. And that's when Amram, it says, he gave Miriam tipcha roish, he gave Miriam a smack and says, where's your prophecy? I remarried your mother, and everybody remarried their woman because of you, 6-year-old girl. What happened? But what does Miriam do? She goes, she stands there. She stands there. Does she know how it's going to work out? She doesn't know how it's going to work out. But she stands there with deep commitment, deep vision, deep faith, emunah, resilience. And of course, when the daughter of Parai comes and retrieves the basket and takes out the baby, Miriam says, should I go find somebody to nurse? Here again, we come to the next Meinika, and Basya says, of course, and she brings mommy, the mommy of Moshe Rabbeinu. Basya probably understood. She makes believe she doesn't know. You could see it from the Chumash, the inner tension over there, and Moshe still has his attachment with his mother. And that's why we understand why after the sea splits, and everybody has a song, Shiras Miriam, it's at the Shira of the Jewish people, Miriam says she has to sing a song. She is the one who gives the grand finale of the Shira. Why her? Because she is the one who was there from the beginning before Moshe was born. She stood, she was there at everybody's side at moments of crisis, saying, I don't know how it's going to work out, but it's going to work out. And now when it worked out, the Jews crossed the sea, the Egyptians were drowned. At last, they were free. It's Miriam who can really sing the song of appreciation, of gratitude. It's Miriam who Moshe understood really gets the credit for this. It's Miriam who can reap the harvest of all those years of tears and suffering, because Miriam comes from the word mar, bitterness, but also has within it the word Miriam, to uplift, and the word mayim, of course, water inside the word Miriam. So Yaakov, generations earlier, may not want to come back. He's like, I'm here by Lavan. Leave me alone. I'm a shepherd. I'm doing my thing. He's paying my job. I have kids. Let's not go anywhere. We could understand. Yaakov had enough. But she's going to remind him who he is. Yaakov, you're not just a shepherd made to work for somebody else, to be tricked and oppressed by your father-in-law loved one who doesn't want you. There's a destiny. She is that inner voice in Yaakov's neshama. That voice that was never, ever silenced because it was there all the way from the beginning. Spiritually, it was there from the beginning. To remind Yaakov Avinu who he is. And now when he's frightened because of what happened in Shechem, she is there to encourage him, to inspire him, to be that pedagogue to him, just as she was for his mother. Just looking at her must have reminded Yaakov of his whole story. It's a story of Avram, it's a story of Yitzchak, it's a story of Sarah, it's a story of Rivkah. None of them could have children, but they're here today. Generations pass. The Jews are in Eretz Yisrael. They don't have a king. They don't have peace. They're completely oppressed by Sisera. 20 years, they don't have a moment of serenity. All they could think of is, how do we send the next bribe, the next sacrifice to silence Sisera so that he just lets us live and breathe under his tyranny? And who is the one who sends a message to Barak? You have to reclaim your destiny. The Jewish people are not made to be oppressed for eternity, to live in constant fear. It's that same Devorah, that same spirit, who goes and inspires Barak and says, you have to believe in your destiny. You have to believe in our vocation, in our shlichus, in our mission, in our past, in our present, and in our future. How do they do it? Their name is Devorah. The first time around, the name doesn't tell the story because it's just the beginning. But the second time around, when she passes away, she finished her mission. Now we have to know her name. Her name is Devorah. We all know about the Devorah. The Devorah is a bee. You don't want to get into a fight with a bee. The bee bites, the bee stings, and the sting is painful. But the bee also produces the sweetest of all foods, which is, of course, the honey. Eretz Yisrael is Da'idol Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash, the land that flows with milk and honey. The power of the Devorahs in the world is that even when they experience a sting, and it's so easy to run, but Devorah says, no, don't run, don't flee, don't despair, don't surrender to depression and sadness. You can turn this sting into a catalyst for honey, for a new light, for a new awareness, for a new sweetness. What is more, halachically, it's problematic because we have a principle, hayoytse min hatamei tamei. I'm not allowed to drink the milk that comes from a pig. Why? Because anything that comes from a non-kosher animal, you're not allowed to eat. An egg from a non-kosher bird, you're not allowed to eat that egg. A chicken's egg I can eat. But what's the problem with an egg? An egg is kosher? No. Depends where the egg comes from. I ask you, is somebody allowed to eat a bee? Anybody knows? A bee. I know it's not on the menu, but theoretically. No, a bee is a treifa creature. It's not kosher. So how can you eat the bee's honey? It's a problem. The Talmud describes, how are we eating a bee's honey? It's yoytze min hatamei. And Chazal struggle with this. They struggle. But that's the chiddush of the bee, one of the sources. Today we know it in science, fascinating. They say that the honey doesn't come from the bee. The bee eats nectar from the flowers, and then it has enzymes that transforms the nectar into the honey that she then puts into the honey hive. So Chazal explained that this is not called coming out of her body. Fascinating how it works scientifically. But that's the concept of a bee. The same problem we have with milk, by the way. Because milk is Eivra min hachai. You milk a cow, the cow is alive. You're not allowed to eat a part of an animal when it's alive. It's called Eivra min hachai. How are we allowed to drink milk? Not only that, milk, the Gemara says, Chelev, Neker, v'Nasadan. Milk, biochemically, is a transformation from blood. You're not allowed to eat blood either. And how do we know you're allowed to eat milk? Because Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash. It flows with milk and honey. So the Torah says you're allowed to drink milk because that's Eretz Yisrael. So you see a lot of drink milk. So honey and milk, zavas chalav udvash, have this ability, the transformation. Milk should be tameh, milk should be asur, evrim and achai, coming from blood, but nonetheless it's permissible. And honey as well, coming from the bee, which is tameh, and it's a sting, which is tumah, impurity, and it stings. Nonetheless, it becomes kosher, it becomes permissible, it becomes our honey cake, our lekach, the sweetest delicacy in food. What does this really mean? When Devorah is standing there by Rivka's side, Rivka is a rose among thorns. That's like the honey stored in the bee. Rivka's in a place of impurity, but the Devorah manages to extricate her from that. Just as the bee itself extricates the honey from itself, which becomes kosher. She also nurses Rivka with milk. Milk, too, is that food that essentially should be forbidden, and nonetheless, it represents transformation. The pasuk says, Dvash v'chalav tachas l'shaynech, milk and honey under your tongue. And therefore, it's the Devorahs who have that tenacious resilience that even when the Jewish people are experiencing the stings of history, they say, do not surrender, do not give up. You have to be able to know that inside this very bee, there's an opportunity for tremendous growth, tremendous sweetness, tremendous blessing, tremendous light. And she convinces Yaakov to come back to Eretz Yisrael, which is the land that flows with milk and honey. Devorah brings honey, produces honey, and she is the one who gave Yaakov Avinu milk. It's the later second Devorah who convinces Barak to allow the Jews to live in Eretz Yisrael in peace, the land that flows with milk and honey. Her name is Devorah. And Sisera, of course, is killed through milk. So Rivka's nurses her with milk. Her name is connected to honey. The second Devorah, of course, her name is connected to honey, and Sisera is killed through the milk that another woman gives him, the wife of Hever Hakeni. Something else happens. The Gemara says in Nazir that it says 7 times that Sisera kneeled in the presence of the wife of Hever Hakeni, who killed him. And Chazal learn out from this that the only way this happened was because she experienced intimacy with Sisera 7 times. And they derive it from the Psukim. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Sadik Vav, many versions, Mibnei Banav Shal Sisera Lamdu Torah B'Bnei Barak Umanu Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a descendant of Sisera. The Megala Amukah says that the relationship between the wife of Hever Hakeni, Yael, and Sisera was the seed that produced generations later Rabbi Akiva. So here you have the ultimate sting, the ultimate Russia, and from there emerged the ultimate honey. Rabbi Akiva, who of course is the same letters like Yaakov, and the Arizal says he himself was a reincarnation of Yaakov, just like Rabbi Akiva's wife was Rachel, who was a reincarnation of Yaakov's wife, Rachel, the Akeres Habayis. So in this story of Sisera being defeated, a new soul emerges, the soul of Rabbi Akiva. Devorah passes away. Yaakov buries her. Yaakov settles in Hebron. Time passes, but there's no serenity. There's no Atayil Alfei Revava. Yosef is sold into slavery. The brothers are splintered. Yehuda is sent away from the brothers. Vayered Yehuda meis Echel. He finally marries. He has 3 sons, Eir, Oinan, Shelah. Eir marries Tamar. Eir dies. Oinan marries Tamar. Oinan dies. Yehuda will not give his daughter-in-law to his 3rd son because he blames her for the death of his children. He doesn't know the truth. And therefore Tamar is now left alone, bound to the 3rd child in levirate marriage, Yibum, but nonetheless can't because Yehuda doesn't want his 3rd son to marry Tamar. At this moment, if somebody was Tamar looking at this scene, it's time to say, I tried very hard, let me move on. It's time to move on with life. But Tamar, who according to the Arizal has that soul of Devorah, or Devorah who has that soul of Tamar, understands that something else has to happen. And here, take a look at the last source. Bereshis Rabbah Pei Hey Aleph. Vayihi be'esahi. At that time, Yehuda left his brothers. They actually demoted him. Reb Shmuel Bar Nachman Pasach, Ki anoichi yadati es hamachshavos. Reb Shmuel quotes a pasuk in Yirmiyah 29. God says, I know all the thoughts. I know all the schemes. Shvatim hayu asukim b'mechirasei shel Yosef. The brothers were busy selling their brother Yosef. Yosef hayu asuk b'saki b'tanisa. Yosef was busy fasting. He was with his sack and his fasting. Yosef, trying to figure out his own life and mending his past. Reuven was busy fasting because what he did with his father and Bilhah, he took his father's bed out of Bilhah's tent and put it into Leah's tent. He interfered into Yaakov's private life, for which Yaakov was very upset. So he's fasting. Yaakov is busy fasting and mourning because he lost his son Yosef, who was apparently devoured by an animal. And Yehuda was busy trying to get married. You hear what's happening? This is the scene. Everybody's doing their own thing. Yaakov is grieving. He misses his son Yosef. Of course, reminds him of the death of Rachel, his beloved wife. Yosef is fasting and grieving. He lost his father. He lost his family. Reuven is fasting and grieving because of a sin that he did 9 years earlier, after Rachel died. The Shvatim despise their brother and they're busy selling him into slavery. They don't want to have him anymore. And Yehuda says, I need to get married. And the Medrash continues, V'akadosh Baruch Hu. And what was Hashem doing? He was busy creating the light of Mashiach. Because when Yehuda was with Tamar, Tamar conceived 2 children, Peretz and Zerach, and Peretz, of course, would be the great-great-great-grandfather of Boaz, who would be the father of Ovid, who would be the father of Yishai, who would be the father of David, who would be the father of Shlomo HaMelech. And of course, that would be the dynasty of Jewish royalty and Mashiach. But who did he create this light of Mashiach through? Through Tamar. Through Tamar, the soul of Devorah. Tamar could have easily left. This was a failing proposition on every single level. Her husband died, her second husband died, her father-in-law put her in an impossible situation. She couldn't be free because she was bound up to Shelah. He would not give her to Shelah. This was a dismal failure on every level, moral, psychological, never mind the grief and the pain and the emotions and the sense of betrayal. But Tamar had that ability to be able to know the Achaysenu Ateyila Alfei Revava, to be able to remain tenaciously connected to the big picture. She had the long-term vision of history to know that the momentary distress, pain, grief, disappointment, setbacks, failures, frustration, the terrible, terrible grief that exists in the world, even though one sobs and one experiences it and one is in pain by it, never ever allow it to deter you from the Achaysenu Ateyila Alfei Revava V'yireh Zarich Shar Soinov, the ability to be able to be a moral leader with unwavering clarity, resilience, tenacious strength, unwavering commitment and dedication to your ultimate goal, to your ultimate destiny. And Tamar has to really engage in acts that are quite brazen and unconventional. But the light of Mashiach was created that moment. The light of eternity, the light of ultimate Geula, when the oneness of all of history comes together, when the deeper destiny that really pervades every moment of life can be manifested in the most exquisite and divine way. Because what is Geula? Geula, it says in Medrash, is Goyla with an Aleph. It's interesting. The word for exile is Goyla. The word for redemption is Geula. It's exactly the same words. Goyla, Goyla. The difference is, in Geula, it's an Aleph. There's an Aleph, which means it doesn't take you away from exile. It reveals the Aleph in the Goyla. The oneness, Echad, Hashem Echad in the Geula. Geula is that one could look at life, but instead of seeing it as fragmented, as a detached series of events, some exciting, some sad, some exhilarating, some that break us, some that build us, some that destroy us, some that we dance at, some that we cry at. There's vicissitudes. the fluctuations of life. There's an olive, there's a oneness that's pervasive. Doesn't mean it makes sense. Miriam doesn't know how it's going to work out. The nurse of Rivkah doesn't know how it's going to work out. Devorah the prophetess may not know, and Tamar certainly doesn't know how it's working out. But Tamar knows Yehuda is busy getting married, and this one is busy crying, and this one is busy fasting. And in all that, and from that Goyla, Hashem is creating a light of Geula, a light of Mashiach. Tamar sees it, Tamar feels it in her bones. And she's the one who initiates the process. She can't tell Yehuda. It's like what we spoke last week with Rachel and Leah. Some things, if you tell people what's going to happen, they're going to run away. If you tell Yaakov it's time to marry Leah, I can't. It's not for me. Tamar knows she can't tell Yehuda everything because Yehuda was not ready to have, in a revealed way, the light of Mashiach. Tamar could be aware of it. Yehuda had to be unconscious in the process. Just as generations earlier, with Lot and his daughters, Lot had to be drunk. The daughters knew what they were doing. Lot didn't know what's happening. He was drunk. But that's when the light of Moav was created, and Moav would be the grandfather of Rus, who would marry Boaz, who was the grandson of Peretz, who was the son of Tamar and Yehuda. And later, Rus and Boaz also won't know what hit him. The middle of the night when Rus appears. Rus knows exactly what she's doing. Naomi knows exactly what she's doing, but not Boaz. He's caught by surprise. Vayelafes, he's trembling, just as Yehuda is caught by surprise. And later what happened with David and his wife. Why? Because when such lights are coming into the world, my brain often resists it. I can't, it's too much. Let me sit on my couch, let other people change the world. But the Dvorahs of the world, who know that within the sting, there is also powerful, powerful honey, who know that even that which looks like tumah, a bee, ultimately produces that which is amazingly kosher and sweet and delicious. She can create the light of Mashiach during that very difficult and unpredictable moment. And if I may make this relevant to everyone sitting here or listening now or later, how many of your mothers or your grandmothers or your great-grandmothers stood at the gates of Auschwitz on January 27th, 1945, and they walked out of a death camp with this sign, Arbeit macht frei, work will set you free. And they knew that they lost everybody and everything. Mothers and fathers and siblings, nephews, nieces, sometimes spouses, sometimes their own first families. They could not even conceive how anything will work out, how life can be rebuilt. In fact, if somebody could conceive it, you wouldn't call them human. They were stripped from everything, physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And you all know I'm using words that don't really capture the depth of their experiences, of their life, of what they went through. Because no quill, no pen, and no mouth, as blessed and talented as it may be, can capture on paper or through the greatest oratory skills the unfathomable grief and pain and sadness and the insanity of it all in just a few short years between 1939 and 1945. But I think you all know that all these women, your mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, heard somewhere in the depth of their souls those words, Achaisenu at heyi la'alfei revava. Sisters, you will grow into thousands and myriads. They heard it. They heard it in every bone of their body. They heard it with every fiber of their being. They heard it in the depth of their souls. Did they understand it? Absolutely not. Did they know how it's going to happen? Absolutely not. Could they wrap their brain around their past and their future? Absolutely not. They could not. But everyone sitting here, I think most of us sitting here in this room, or wherever you are around the world, are the products, are the blessings, are the offsprings of that entire generation of women who the day that they stood at those cursed gates, Shar Seinov, easily could have surrendered to endless despair and resignation, which would have been very human and very normal. But they had that soul and that vision of Acheseinu Atayi La'alfei Revava. And today, 75 years later, literally 75 years later, a nation was reborn. A nation experienced rejuvenation and renaissance. So that's why by so many weddings we go over to the bride. And when the bride is covered by her chassan, and we say, life sometimes is filled with covers. Life is filled with concealments. Rivka's face was concealed, and often life is filled with concealments. The word oilam comes from the word helam. There are setbacks, there are failures, there are things that conceal our light, Hashem's light, the light of our children, the light of our loved ones, the light of our spouses, the light of friends. Life is challenging. Sometimes we find ourselves in a place that's antithetical to light and clarity. We feel our vision is eclipsed, our eyes are eclipsed. And at that moment we tell the bride, Acheseinu Atayi La'alfei Revava. Quoting those words that were told to Rivkah on that fateful day. And the one person who heard those words and who never allowed Rivkah to forget those words and never allowed Rivkah to ignore those words and never allowed Rivkah to feel that those words will not be a reality. That meinekes of Rivkah, that Devorah, who was there from the beginning, remained throughout. And at pointed junctures, when things seemed to go down south and fail, she was there to not only maintain the faith, but to make sure that the joy and the gusto of the eternity of Netzach Yisrael of Jewish history, to ultimately heal the world and reveal the oneness of Hashem in the entire universe, will be maintained with the greatest passion and commitment and resilience. So as Yaakov is now coming full circle, it's 20 years, he ran away. Things were not looking good. His brother wanted to kill him. Rivkah did not know how it's going to work out. Rivkah's pedagogue didn't know how it's going to work out. But she knew it will work out. 20 years later, Yaakov is coming back to Bethel, the same place where he had that dream 20 years earlier. Afraid, distressed, overwhelmed, alone in the world. The Medrash says that's when Yaakov said, Shir Amalis, Esa Einay Eloharim, May Ayin Yava Yezri, I look up to my parents, Hirim, May Ayin Yava Yezri, where can I ever find help? We spoke about this a few years ago, right before Corona. And now he escapes and he's coming back. He left with a stick. And now he came back with a complete family. But with a lot of challenges, with a lot of distress, with a lot of fear. And then the story with Dina, which of course is probably one of the worst things that can happen to a family. Some of you understand very well what I'm saying. And now the journey is coming close to its end. That stage of the journey is being completed. Yaakov is coming back home full circle to be with his father, and he hopes his mother again. At this point, exactly at this point, Yaakov is coming back to Bethel. He's frightened because of Shechem. But it says that Hashem, Vayichitas Elikim, the fear of Hashem was on those inhabitants. He's coming back to Bethel. So the Torah says we have to put in one more pasuk here. It's exactly where it belongs. And the pasuk is about that one person who clandestinely stood at Rivka's side, at Yitzchak's side, at Yaakov's side, at Yaakov's wife's side. And now when Yaakov made it back to Eretz Yisrael, he's about to go home. She finished her shlichus in the world. She finished her mission in the world. She passes away. That living link who always remained present through thick and thin returns her soul to its maker. And even though she passed away, and Yaakov weeps, not only she passed away, Rivkah passed away. The one who she invested everything for. So that link to the past is now gone. But the fact is that the seeds that they planted will endure. Yaakov buries her. He creates that name, Aloin Bachos. The seeds that she planted in Yaakov's soul, in his children's soul, will endure. The next scene is Yaakov is now sees Hashem, and Hashem says, now change your name. From Yaakov to Yisrael. Yaakov means a heel, holding on to Esav's heel, busy confronting Esav, fighting with Esav. Now your name becomes Yisrael, which are the letters Li Rosh. You're not a heel, you're my head. Ki sarisem elikim v'manashem batuchal. You have wrestled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. And in the next scene, Rachel will pass away. And in that, the life of the matriarchs will end in Chumash. We won't hear any more about Rivkah. We don't hear about Sarah, obviously. We don't hear about Rachel. And we don't hear about Leah. But those seeds that they planted and they have given their children will remain for eternity. It will continue. And generations later, Devorah, Hanaviah, will come back to that very place, Aloin Bachos, where that faith, that soul of Devorah was buried, in other words, planted. Because by Jews, we're never buried. As somebody once said, they buried me, but they didn't know that I'm a seed. And when you bury a seed, it doesn't get buried. Sooner or later, it's going to grow into a splendid tree. So in that place where Devorah was buried, and Yaakov called it Aloin Bachos, the oak of tears, another Devorah comes. And those seeds inspire her to inspire Klal Yisrael at that time after 20 years of terrible fear and oppression. And those seeds that Devorah plants will continue all the way to Rabbi Akiva, who comes from the ultimate B, from the ultimate Tumah, from the ultimate Sisra. Rabbi Akiva, Kulu Alibad Rabbi Akiva, who would transmit the whole Torah Shabbal Peh at a time when Romans will completely destroy it, also on the credit of his wife, Rachel. Another woman who understood Yaakov's tenacious power, who understood Rabbi Akiva's power, and would not let him slip away and just be a shepherd like Yaakov. Just stay by Lavan, be a nice shepherd, bring home a check to your family, and move on. Rachel told Rabbi Akiva, you're the one who could save the world from Roman oppression. That ability to be able to see potential where nobody sees it. To be able to see light where others see darkness. To be able to see honey where other people feel stings. To be able to see a future where other people see piles of ashes. To be able to see redemption where other people see exile. That is the ability that these extraordinary people have bequeathed to all of the Jewish people, and one that's continued to be carried today by our own mothers and daughters until that great moment when the Aleph gets revealed and it all becomes one. B'mehei b'yameinu. Amen. Thank you. Just an announcement. Next week there's no class. I'm going to be in London. So next Tuesday, please, if you know anybody who comes, please tell them. And next Wednesday, in honor of Yutas Kislev, there will be a Farbrengen here in the tent with myself and Rabbi Sheis Taub and Eli Marcus. It's for men and women with a mechitza. That's next Wednesday night at 8. Chanukah, which is the week after, there will be a class. Be'ezer Hashem, same time. Have a wonderful week and thank you very much.
Kept on saying 20 years, but it was 22 years.
Yes.
That's why yesterday.
20 years away and then 2 years on the journey. Yeah. 20
so
plus, 20
was
and change.
amazing.
Thank
So
you.
there's one piece that you forgot to tie in, even though you mentioned
Yes.
it, is the cries of Sistra's mother.
Yes.
Is what brought this chos
Yes.
of Rabbi Akiva.
Yes, yes, yes.
When cried, she was rewarded.
Yes.
Her tears, yes.
Yes.
I remember that shir you gave us.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The same reason why there were 4 giants for the 4 steps.
I know, but
Yeah, the
like
Megala
that power
Amukas
of
even
women.
writes
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Sisra's mother is also a metaphor for the Shechina. The Shechina was crying that Sisra managed to plant the seed of Rabbi Akiva in the world before he was killed.
Right, that was part of that too. You
Yeah.
gave us that.
She was crying. She was crying if the potential of Sisra was squandered or it came into the world.
Who was crying?
It says that Sisra's mother is a metaphor for the Shechina.
right.
She felt that her son has a tremendous gift with all of his evil.
I know. I know. It was so amazing.
There's so much in it. We really, this is a double.
That shir that you
double
gave us,
whammy.
that one, like literally, like we heard it yesterday. How many years ago was it?
a great recap.
Gets so
Yeah.
amazing.
Saying that's what I do.
Yeah, the Zavas Chalav Dvash is Dvash Tmarim. You hear it? Rebbetzin. The Dvash, the honey of Eretz Yisrael, is Dvash Tmarim.
Right.
It's the honey of dates, which is also Tamar.
Which is,
Stam, it's also that.
See, I should know
So
that from my
Devorah
own
is
daughter.
honey, Devorah produces honey, and a Tamar produces honey.
Right.
Tmarim. And Eretz Yisrael was praised by being a land of milk and honey that comes from dates, which is Tamar,
And don't
who is
forget
the
the
soul
milk
of
is a milk
Devorah.
goat.
Good. Achatenu at. You are our sister, and therefore we're telling you, Hayila Alfei Revava. May you grow into thousands of myriads. Thank you for the correction.
Eyi, it's at Tiyi.
Yeah, at tiyi.
Yeah.
Achatenu
How
at.
it's divided. Yeah.
Achatenu at. Teyi la'alfi revava. Beautiful. V'yirar zarech et shar sonav. Beautiful.
Makes sense?
Yeah. Well, you know better. At Meretz Yisrael. Ani Amerikayim, ani Yodea.
You're a genius.
Toda.
And that almost 2 hours. No, it's wonderful.
Little too long, yeah. And it's tzarich koach hatzimtzum. I always tell my students, triple speed was created for me.
You can make it.
But thank you for coming. Welcome.
Thank you.
Shea b'hatzlacha.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.